The invitation arrived without warmth or ceremony. A thick envelope slipped beneath a stack of unpaid utility bills and school notices as if it belonged there, mocking the life it had wandered into by accident. And when I picked it up, I could feel the weight of money in the paper. The kind of money that never touches people like me, except when it wants to remind us of our place. And as I stood in the kitchen with grease still on my hands from fixing the sink, I stared at the gold lettering and wondered how a life built on sirens, sweat, and sleepless nights had somehow led me to a ballroom where strangers in tailored suits would sip champagne worth more than my entire grocery budget. And the woman who placed that invitation there, my wife, stood by the door adjusting her coat, not meeting my eyes, already halfway out of the marriage that had once been the center of my world, her heels clicking like a countdown I couldn't stop. And in that moment, I felt the quiet certainty that I was being summoned not as a partner, not even as a husband, but as a prop in a story where I no longer had a speaking role, a decorative reminder that she had outgrown me, a shadow to stand in the background while she stepped into the light she believed she deserved. I had spent most of my adult life racing through streets under flashing lights, pulling strangers back from the edge, learning to read the subtle signs of disaster before they became irreversible. Yet I somehow missed the slow collapse of my own home, the way my wife's laughter changed when she spoke about work, the way her phone glowed more often than her eyes did when she looked at me, and the way the house filled with silence even when she was standing right beside me, because silence is loud when it replaces connection. And I told myself it was just stress, just ambition, just the natural drift of two people growing older. But deep down, I felt like I was watching a patient whose vitals were failing while convincing myself the monitor must be broken. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting that the life I had fought to protect was already slipping away. And no amount of training could teach me how to resuscitate a marriage that no longer wanted to live. We had once met in a season of hope, in a time when she spoke about helping people and changing lives, when her dreams were wrapped in compassion rather than contracts, and I fell for that version of her, the one who believed kindness was a currency more valuable than influence. But somewhere along the way her reflection changed, and the mirror now showed a woman driven by titles, applause, and the approval of people who would never care about her the way a family does. And I stayed because love makes you loyal to memories even when they no longer match reality. Because you cling to the past believing it will return if you wait long enough, not realizing that time does not rewind itself for anyone, no matter how desperately they wish it would. When she told me I had to attend the event, her voice carried the same tone she used in meetings, firm, final, unchallenged. And when I hesitated, she reminded me that appearances mattered, that the people who surrounded her expected a certain image. And I realized that I was no longer a person in her eyes but a symbol, an accessory she needed to complete the picture she presented to the world. And as I looked around our home at the children who still believed in us, who still thought we were a team, I felt a tightening in my chest, because I knew that what she called one night was really the unveiling of everything she had already chosen over us. The night arrived like a storm wrapped in silk, the ballroom glowing with light that reflected off glass and crystal, the air heavy with perfume and pretense. And as I walked in behind her, I felt every step widen the distance between us, her moving toward the front where power gathered, me guided toward the edges where anonymity lived. And when I took my seat far from the stage, surrounded by strangers discussing numbers that meant nothing to me, I finally understood that I had been placed exactly where she believed I belonged, far enough away to be forgotten but close enough to be seen when it suited her. And that realization burned deeper than any insult ever could. I watched her across the room, watched the way her smile changed when she spoke to a man whose presence seemed to bend the space around him, a man whose confidence came not from character but from control, and I saw his hand move with familiarity, saw her lean in rather than pull away. And in that moment every doubt I had buried rose to the surface like a tidal wave, washing away years of denial. And as she glanced at me with a look that dared me to react, I felt something inside me shift. a quiet breaking point where patience ended and self-respect finally began. Because humiliation is not just an emotion, it is a message, and that message was clear. I left my table not in anger but in resolve, walking through a crowd that no longer felt real, as if I had stepped out of a painting and into a life that finally belonged to me again. And when I confronted him, his words confirmed everything I already knew, that he saw himself as untouchable, that he believed money excused behavior and power erased consequences. And in his laughter I heard the echo of every moment I had been dismissed, minimized, and replaced. And for the first time in years, I did not shrink, did not retreat, did not apologize for existing in a world that tried to make me invisible. The moment ended as quickly as it began, but its impact rippled outward, through the room, through the city, through the life we had built together. And when I returned home later that night, the house felt different, as if the walls themselves were exhaling after holding their breath for too long. And when my children looked at me, I saw not fear but understanding, the kind that comes when someone finally does what they were always meant to do. And I realized that strength is not about winning battles, but about refusing to lose yourself in the process. The days that followed were filled with quiet determination, with plans made not in anger but in clarity, because I knew that the only way forward was through honesty, even when it hurt. And as I gathered evidence, memories, and truths I had ignored, I felt lighter, as if each admission freed me from the weight of pretending. And when she finally came home to confront me, her words felt empty, echoes of a life she had already abandoned. And I understood that endings do not always come with closure. Sometimes they come with courage. Standing there in the aftermath, I felt grief for what had been, relief for what was ending, and hope for what might still be possible. Because even broken things can be rebuilt when you stop trying to preserve what no longer serves you. And as the door closed behind her, I did not feel alone. I felt open, like a window finally letting in fresh air after years of suffocation. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that my story was no longer about survival, but about becoming whole again. The weeks that followed felt like walking through the quiet after a storm, the kind where debris still lies scattered but the air is suddenly clearer. And every morning I woke with the strange sensation that my life had finally started moving forward instead of in circles, even though there were still legal meetings, school schedules, and nights where memories tried to pull me back into a version of myself that no longer existed. And through it all I held onto the knowledge that I had chosen dignity over comfort, truth over illusion, and even when doubt crept in, it never stayed long, because each day brought small reminders that I had not lost my family, I had reclaimed it, and that realization gave me a steady sense of purpose I had not felt in years. The children adapted faster than I expected, not because they were unaffected, but because they had already sensed the fracture long before it became visible. And now they seemed lighter, laughing more freely, speaking openly, as if the tension that once filled the house had quietly slipped away with the woman who created it. And while they still asked questions, they no longer blamed themselves for the distance they had felt. And I made sure to remind them that love is not something you earn through perfection. It is something you deserve simply by existing, and that their worth had never been tied to anyone's ambition or approval. Life returned to a rhythm shaped by early mornings, late nights, and shared meals that felt meaningful again. And in between shifts, I found myself rediscovering simple pleasures like fixing old furniture, cooking dinners from scratch, and watching my children grow into people with opinions, dreams, and resilience that inspired me daily. And though the future still held uncertainties, they no longer frightened me. Because I had learned that fear loses its power when you face it directly instead of running from it. There were moments when the past tried to reclaim me, when a familiar song or scent stirred old emotions, but instead of resisting them, I acknowledged them, letting each memory pass through without allowing it to define me. And in doing so I realized that healing is not about forgetting. It is about remembering without pain, about honoring what once was while choosing not to live there anymore. And with every passing week, I felt myself becoming someone stronger, more grounded, more present than I had ever been before. The world outside continued as it always had, people chasing titles, recognition, and validation. Yet I no longer felt tempted by those illusions, because I had witnessed firsthand how hollow they could be when built on betrayal and ego. And instead I focused on building a life measured not by status but by connection, not by wealth but by peace. And this shift transformed the way I saw everything, from my work to my relationships to the future I wanted for my children. One evening, as we sat together sharing stories and laughter, I realized that joy had returned quietly, without announcement, slipping back into our lives when we were no longer searching for it. And in that moment, I understood that happiness is not found in grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but in the everyday moments that remind you why you keep going, why you choose to love again, why you refuse to give up even when it feels easier to do so. The journey had not been easy, but it had been necessary, and every challenge, every painful truth, every difficult choice had led me here, to a place where I could finally breathe, finally trust myself, finally believe that the future held more than just survival. It held possibility, and that realization filled me with a quiet confidence that no one could ever take away. As the months passed, I noticed how the children grew more secure, more expressive, and I knew that my decision had not only changed my life, it had changed theirs, giving them a foundation built on honesty rather than appearances. And I felt proud not of what I had endured, but of what I had overcome, and the example I now set for them through my actions rather than my words. Sometimes I still think about the man I used to be, the one who accepted less than he deserved out of fear of losing what he thought was love, and I feel compassion for him, because he did not yet know his worth, but now I do, and that knowledge has become the anchor that keeps me steady no matter what comes my way. And so I move forward, not defined by betrayal or pain, but by the strength I found within myself, by the family that stands beside me, and by the belief that even after the deepest heartbreak, life can still be beautiful, still be meaningful, still be full of hope, because endings are not failures, they are simply beginnings in disguise.